The bitter February wind cut through Jake Morrison's heavy jacket as he trudged through the snow-covered mountain trail. As a wildlife photographer, he was used to harsh conditions, but this particular morning felt especially brutal. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees overnight, and the snow was falling so heavily that visibility was down to just a few feet ahead. Jake had been tracking a family of elk for his upcoming magazine feature when he first heard the sound. It was faint at first, almost lost in the howling wind. But there was something about it that made him stop in his tracks. It sounded like whimpering, the kind of desperate cry that no animal lover could ignore. He adjusted his camera equipment and followed the sound, his boots crunching through the deep snow. The trail led him away from his planned route, down a steep embankment that he normally would have avoided. But the crying was getting louder now, more urgent, and Jake knew he had to investigate. What he found at the bottom of the ravine would haunt him for the rest of his life. 6 German Shepherd puppies, no more than 8 weeks old, were huddled together in a makeshift den someone had dug into the hillside. But this wasn't a rescue situation someone had carefully planned. These puppies had been abandoned, left to die in the freezing wilderness. The sight that greeted Jake was heartbreaking. All 6 puppies were covered in blood, their fur matted and frozen. Some of the blood appeared to be from wounds, while other patches seemed to be from their attempts to stay warm by pressing against each other. Their tiny bodies were shaking uncontrollably, and their cries were weak and desperate. Jake's first instinct was to gather them all up immediately, but his experience with wildlife rescue told him to be more careful. He needed to assess the situation properly. He pulled out his phone, but as expected in this remote location there was no signal. He was completely on his own, miles from the nearest road, with 6 dying puppies and no immediate way to get help. The largest of the puppies, a male with distinctive black and tan markings, lifted his head when Jake approached. His eyes were barely open, but there was still a spark of life in them. Jake could see that this puppy was trying to protect the others, positioning himself between Jake and his littermates, despite being barely strong enough to hold his head up. Jake carefully examined each puppy. 2 of them appeared to have deep cuts on their legs, likely from trying to climb out of the makeshift den. Another had what looked like frostbite on his ears and paw pads. The smallest of the group, a female, was barely breathing, her tiny chest rising and falling in irregular patterns that Jake knew meant she was in critical condition. As Jake knelt in the snow, trying to figure out his next move, he noticed something that made his blood boil. There were human footprints leading to and from the den, and they were relatively fresh, probably made within the last day or 2. Someone had deliberately brought these puppies here and left them to die. The cruelty of it was overwhelming, but Jake didn't have time to dwell on anger. These puppies needed immediate help, and he was their only chance of survival. He quickly assessed his options. His truck was parked about 2 miles away up a steep and treacherous trail. The puppies were too weak to walk, and carrying all 6 of them at once would be impossible. Jake made a decision that would require multiple trips and enormous physical effort. He would carry as many puppies as he could manage at once, get them to his truck, start the heater, and then return for the others. But he was terrified that some of them might not survive the weight. He carefully lifted the 2 puppies that seemed to be in the worst condition, wrapping them inside his jacket against his body heat. The little female who was barely breathing and one of the males with the deep leg wounds. They felt like ice against his chest, and he could barely feel them breathing. The climb back up the embankment with the puppies was grueling. Jake had to be careful not to slip and fall, which could injure the puppies further or send all of them tumbling back down the hill. Every step was calculated, every breath deliberate. The puppies remained silent during the climb, which worried Jake even more than their earlier crying. When he finally reached his truck, Jake cranked the heater to maximum and gently placed the 2 puppies on the passenger seat. Covering them with a spare blanket he kept in the vehicle, he gave them a quick check and was relieved to see that both were still breathing, though weakly. Without wasting a moment, Jake headed back down the trail. The snow was still falling heavily, and he realized that if he didn't get all the puppies out soon, the weather conditions might make it impossible to find them again. The thought of losing any of them drove him to move faster, despite the exhaustion that was already setting in. The second trip was even more difficult. Jake carried 2 more puppies, including the brave male who had tried to protect the others. These 2 seemed slightly stronger, but they were still dangerously cold and weak. By the time he got them to the truck, Jake was breathing heavily and his legs were shaking from the exertion, but he couldn't rest yet. 2 more puppies were still waiting in the ravine, and Jake could see that the storm was getting worse. The wind was picking up and the temperature seemed to be dropping even further. He checked on the 4 puppies in his truck, adjusted their blankets and started the engine to keep the heater running while he made his final trip. The last 2 puppies were the most heartbreaking of all. They had stopped crying and were barely moving when Jake reached them. One of them, a small male with beautiful markings, didn't even lift his head when Jake approached. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought he might be too late, but when he gently touched the puppy, he felt the tiny heartbeat, faint, but still there. Jake wrapped both puppies in his remaining dry clothing and began the final climb back to his truck. This time he was running purely on adrenaline and determination. His body was exhausted, his hands were numb from the cold, but the thought of these innocent animals depending on him kept him moving forward. Jake's hands were shaking as he arranged all 6 puppies in his truck, not just from the cold but from the overwhelming responsibility he now carried. The heater was running at full blast, but the puppies were still dangerously cold. Their tiny bodies felt like ice and some of them had stopped shivering, which Jake knew was a bad sign. When the body stops shivering, it means it's shutting down to preserve vital organs. The nearest veterinary clinic was 45 minutes away under normal conditions, but with the storm intensifying, Jake knew it would take much longer. He grabbed his phone again, hoping that as he drove toward town he might pick up a signal and be able to call ahead. But for now he was racing against time with no way to get professional advice. As Jake carefully navigated the mountain roads, he kept glancing at the puppies. The smallest female was barely breathing, her tiny chest rising and falling so slowly that Jake had to watch carefully to make sure she was still alive. The brave male who had tried to protect the others was slightly more responsive, occasionally opening his eyes and making small whimpering sounds. About 15 minutes into the drive, Jake finally got a weak cell phone signal. His hands were shaking as he dialed the emergency number for the Mountain View Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Sarah Martinez answered on the second ring, and Jake quickly explained the situation. 6 German Shepherd puppies, approximately 8 weeks old, severe hypothermia, some bleeding wounds, found abandoned in a snowstorm, Jake said, his voice tight with urgency. I'm about 30 minutes out, maybe longer with this weather. Dr. Martinez immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Jake, listen to me carefully. Keep that heater running, but don't make it too hot too fast. Rapid rewarming can be dangerous. Do you have any blankets or towels? Yes, I've got them wrapped up, Jake replied, taking a sharp turn more carefully than usual. Good. If any of them stop breathing, you'll need to do puppy CPR. Place your mouth over their nose and mouth and give very gentle breaths, just small puffs of air. Their lungs are tiny. And Jake, I'm calling in my emergency team now. We'll be ready for you. The conversation gave Jake some comfort, but he could see that the smallest puppy was getting worse. Her breathing was becoming even more irregular, and her body felt limp when he gently touched her. Jake found himself talking to the puppies as he drove, encouraging them to hang on, telling them that help was coming. Come on, little ones, he said softly. You've been so brave. Just a little bit longer and Dr. Martinez is going to take good care of you. The storm was making driving treacherous. Jake had to reduce his speed significantly as the snow accumulated on the roads. Other drivers had pulled over to wait out the worst of the weather, but Jake knew these puppies didn't have time to wait. He drove with the skill of someone who had spent years navigating mountain roads, but even his experience was being tested by the conditions. Halfway to the clinic, disaster struck. The smallest female puppy stopped breathing completely. Jake pulled over safely and quickly but carefully lifted her tiny form. She was completely limp and Jake couldn't detect any heartbeat. Following Dr. Martinez's instructions, he placed his mouth over the puppy's tiny nose and mouth and gave the gentlest breath he could manage. Nothing happened. Jake tried again, this time placing one finger on the puppy's chest to feel for any response. Still nothing. Panic began to set in, but Jake forced himself to stay calm. He remembered reading somewhere that puppies could sometimes be revived even after several minutes of not breathing. He continued the tiny rescue breaths, one every few seconds, while gently massaging the puppy's chest with one finger. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 30 seconds, the puppy suddenly gasped and took a small breath on her own. Jake was so relieved he almost cried. He quickly got back on the road, now even more determined to get to the clinic as fast as safely possible. The puppy's breathing was still very weak and irregular, but she was alive. When Jake finally pulled into the clinic parking lot, Dr. Martinez and her team were waiting with a gurney and warming equipment. Jake had never been so happy to see anyone in his life. The veterinary team immediately took over, quickly but gently transferring each puppy to warming beds in the emergency treatment room. Dr. Martinez worked with the efficiency of someone who had handled countless emergencies. She quickly assessed each puppy, checking their vital signs, body temperature, and examining their wounds. Her assistant, a young veterinary technician named Maria, began cleaning and treating the cuts and scrapes while Dr. Martinez focused on the most critical cases. "This little girl flatlined on me during the drive," Jake told Dr. Martinez, pointing to the smallest puppy. "I managed to get her breathing again, but she's been touch and go." Dr. Martinez nodded grimly as she examined the tiny female. Her body temperature is dangerously low and she's showing signs of severe dehydration, in addition to the hypothermia. We're going to have to be very careful with the rewarming process. The next several hours were a blur of medical activity. Jake waited in the clinic lobby, still wearing his snow-covered clothes, too nervous to leave even for a moment. Every time a member of the veterinary team came out of the treatment room, he stood up hopefully, looking for any news about the puppy's condition. Dr. Martinez emerged after about 3 hours, looking tired but not defeated. "Jake, I have good news and challenging news. The good news is that all 6 puppies are alive and stable for now. The challenging news is that they're all severely malnourished in addition to everything else. Someone didn't just abandon them yesterday. These puppies have been neglected for weeks." Jake felt a new wave of anger at whoever had done this to innocent animals. How could someone do this? They're just babies. "Unfortunately, we see this more often than we'd like," Dr. Martinez replied sadly. "Sometimes people get puppies without understanding the responsibility, or they can't afford proper care. But abandoning them in a snowstorm, that's particularly cruel." She led Jake back to the treatment room where he could see all 6 puppies. They were in individual warming beds with IV lines providing fluids and nutrients. They looked so small and vulnerable, but Jake could see that their breathing was stronger and more regular than it had been in his truck. The brave little male who was trying to protect the others is actually in the best shape, Dr. Martinez explained. "He's going to need antibiotics for his wounds and time to gain weight, but his vital signs are strong. The smallest female is still critical, but she's responded well to the warming and fluid therapy." Jake reached out to gently stroke the head of the protective male puppy. The little guy opened his eyes and looked directly at Jake, and for a moment, Jake swore he could see gratitude in those dark eyes. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Well, they'll need to stay here for at least a week, maybe longer. The medical bills are going to be substantial. And then they'll need homes, preferably people experienced with dogs who understand they may have ongoing health issues from this trauma." Jake looked at the 6 tiny faces and made a decision that would change his life forever. Jake looked Dr. Martinez directly in the eyes and said the words that surprised even himself. "I'll take care of the medical bills. All of them. And I want to adopt them." Dr. Martinez blinked in surprise. "Jake, that's incredibly generous, but do you understand what you're saying? You're talking about 6 German Shepherd puppies who will grow into large dogs. The medical expenses alone could run into thousands of dollars, and that's just for their immediate care. These dogs will need ongoing veterinary attention, proper nutrition, training, and enormous amounts of space and exercise." Jake nodded, his decision becoming more solid with each word he spoke. "I understand. I have a large property. I work from home most of the time, and I've always loved dogs. After what I've seen today, I can't imagine letting these puppies go to separate homes. They've been through trauma together, and they should stay together." The truth was, Jake had been thinking about getting a dog for years. His photography work often kept him isolated for long periods, and he had always felt that his life was missing something. But 6 dogs was far more than he had ever imagined. Still, looking at these tiny survivors, he couldn't imagine any other choice. Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time since Jake had arrived. "You know what? I think that might be exactly what these puppies need. But let's take this one step at a time. First, we need to get them healthy and strong enough to leave the clinic." Over the next week, Jake visited the clinic every single day. He would sit with the puppies during their recovery, talking to them softly and helping with their feeding. The veterinary staff were amazed by how quickly the puppies began to respond to Jake's presence. Whenever he entered the room, all six would perk up, their tails wagging weakly but enthusiastically. The smallest female, whom Jake had started calling Hope, had made remarkable progress. She was still tiny compared to her littermates, but her breathing had stabilized and she was eating on her own. The protective male, who Jake named Guardian, had become particularly attached to Jake, always trying to get closer to him whenever he visited. Jake used the week to prepare his home for his new family. His property was perfect for large dogs, 15 acres of fenced land with a large house and plenty of room to run. He researched German Shepherd care extensively, reading everything he could find about training, nutrition, and health care for the breed. He also had his property inspected and approved by the local animal control officer, who was amazed by Jake's story and his commitment to the puppies. Word had started to spread around the small mountain community about the photographer who had rescued 6 abandoned puppies from a snowstorm. On the day the puppies were finally ready to come home, Dr. Martinez pulled Jake aside for a serious conversation. "Jake, I need to prepare you for something. These puppies have been through severe trauma at a very young age. This kind of experience can have lasting effects on their behavior and development. Some of them may always be more anxious or fearful than normal dogs. Others might have trust issues with strangers." Jake listened carefully as she continued. "Guardian, the one who was protecting the others, shows signs of being naturally protective, which could be wonderful or could become problematic if not properly managed. Hope, our little survivor, may always be smaller and more delicate than her siblings. You're going to need patience, understanding, and probably professional help with training." "I'm ready for all of that," Jake replied confidently. These dogs saved each other in that ravine by staying together. I'm not going to let them down now. The ride home was remarkably peaceful. Jake had installed special car harnesses for puppies, and all 6 dogs seemed content to be together again. They were still small enough that they could all fit comfortably in his SUV, though Jake knew that wouldn't last long. When they arrived at Jake's property, the puppies' reaction was everything he had hoped for. Despite their recent trauma, they seemed to instinctively understand that this was a safe place. They explored the fenced yard cautiously at first, staying close together, but gradually becoming more adventurous. Guardian immediately took on the role of leader, always checking to make sure his siblings were safe before venturing into new areas. Hope stayed close to Guardian, clearly depending on him for confidence. The other 4 puppies each had distinct personalities that were already becoming apparent. There was Scout, an adventurous female who was always the first to investigate new things. Ranger, a calm male who seemed to prefer observing before acting. Storm, a playful female who had boundless energy despite her recent ordeal. And finally, there was Tracker, a thoughtful male who appeared to be the most intelligent of the group. Jake spent the first few days just observing and learning about each puppy's personality and needs. He set up sleeping areas, feeding stations, and play areas throughout his house and yard. The puppies seemed to thrive on routine and security, and Jake made sure they had both, but it wasn't all easy. Hope had several setbacks during her first week home, including one scary night when she became lethargic and wouldn't eat. Jake rushed her back to Dr. Martinez, who determined that Hope was simply more sensitive to stress than her siblings and needed extra care and attention. Guardian appointed himself as Hope's personal protector, rarely leaving her side. If Hope was resting, Guardian would lie down next to her. If she was eating, Guardian would wait until she was finished before eating his own food. Jake was amazed by the depth of care and intelligence these young dogs already displayed. The other 4 puppies also showed remarkable loyalty to each other. They played together, slept together, and seemed to have an instinctive understanding of each other's needs. Scout would often bring toys to Hope when she was feeling unwell. Ranger would share his food if one of the others seemed extra hungry. Storm would tone down her playfulness when she sensed that others needed rest. Jake documented their progress with his photography skills, creating a beautiful record of their recovery and growth. He shared some of these photos on social media, and the response was overwhelming. People from around the world were following the story of the 6 rescued German Shepherds, and many were inspired by Jake's commitment to keeping them together. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon Jake found himself fielding interview requests and donation offers from people who wanted to help with the puppies' care. Jake was touched by the generosity, but he politely declined most donations, preferring to handle the responsibility himself. However, he did accept help from a local dog trainer named Carol Anderson, who specialized in working with traumatized rescue dogs. Carol offered her services free of charge after hearing about the puppy's story. "These dogs have been through something most animals never experience," Carol explained during her first visit. "They're going to need specialized training that takes their trauma into account. But the good news is that they have each other, and they have you. Dogs are incredibly resilient when they feel safe and loved." Carol developed individual training plans for each puppy, while also working on group dynamics. She taught Jake how to read their body language, how to respond to signs of anxiety or fear, and how to build their confidence gradually. The transformation over the next month was remarkable. The puppies grew stronger and more confident every day. Their wounds healed completely. Their coats became shiny and healthy, and their personalities blossomed in the safety of their new home. 3 months after the rescue, Jake's life had transformed completely. What had started as a solo photography business conducted from a quiet mountain home had become a bustling household filled with the energy and chaos of 6 growing German Shepherd puppies. The dogs had nearly tripled in size, and their personalities had fully emerged. Guardian had grown into his name beautifully. He was clearly the pack leader, always alert and watchful. When strangers approached the property, Guardian would position himself between them and his family, not aggressively, but with clear protective intent. Jake worked closely with Carol Anderson to ensure this natural protective instinct was properly channeled. Hope, despite still being the smallest of the group, had developed into a remarkably intelligent and intuitive dog. She seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to sense Jake's moods and needs. On days when Jake was stressed about work deadlines, Hope would quietly come and rest her head on his lap. When he was excited about a new photography project, Hope would match his energy with enthusiastic tail wagging. The other 4 had settled into their own unique roles within the pack. Scout had become the group's explorer and problem solver. If a toy got stuck under furniture, Scout would figure out how to retrieve it. If there was a new sound outside, Scout would investigate first and report back to the others through her body language. Ranger had developed into the group's peacekeeper. When the more energetic puppies got too rough during play, Ranger would step in to calm things down. He had a natural ability to read the emotional temperature of the group and respond accordingly. Storm lived up to her name with boundless energy and enthusiasm for everything. She was the first to greet visitors, the most eager to learn new tricks, and the most vocal about expressing her opinions. Jake often joked that Storm provided running commentary on everything that happened in their household. Tracker had become the problem solver and escape artist of the group. He could figure out how to open gates, locate hidden treats, and find the most comfortable sleeping spots. Jake had to constantly upgrade his security measures to keep up with Tracker's ingenuity. But the real magic was in watching how the 6 dogs functioned as a family unit. They had an intricate social structure that fascinated Jake and impressed everyone who met them. They shared resources fairly, comforted each other during thunderstorms, and seemed to communicate through subtle signals that Jake was still learning to understand. Jake's photography work had also evolved. Inspired by his daily observations of the dogs, he began specializing in animal photography, particularly focusing on the emotional connections between animals and their human families. His photos of the 6 German Shepherds had caught the attention of several magazines, leading to new opportunities and projects. One particular photo had gone viral on social media. It showed all 6 dogs arranged around Jake as he worked at his computer, each dog in a position that seemed perfectly choreographed, but was completely natural. Guardian was lying at Jake's feet. Hope was resting her head on his leg. Scout was watching out the window. Ranger was sleeping peacefully nearby. Storm was playing with a toy, and Tracker was investigating something under Jake's desk. The photo captured the essence of their relationship perfectly. A man and his dogs living in harmony, each contributing something unique to their shared life. The image had been shared thousands of times, with comments from people around the world expressing admiration for Jake's commitment and the dog's obvious contentment. But Jake's story was about to take another unexpected turn. One evening, as he was editing photos in his home office with his usual canine audience, Jake received a phone call that would change everything again. "Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Williams with the Mountain County Sheriff's Department. I understand you're the man who rescued 6 German Shepherd puppies from the wilderness about 3 months ago." Jake's heart immediately began racing. "Yes, that's correct. Is everything okay?" "Sir, we've been investigating a case involving a puppy mill operation that was shut down about 4 months ago. The owner fled before we could arrest him, but we've been tracking his activities. We have reason to believe that the puppies you found were part of his operation." Jake felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that someone had been running a cruel puppy mill, but relief that there might finally be answers about what had happened to his dogs. Detective Williams continued, "We found evidence that this individual was abandoning sick or unwanted puppies in remote locations rather than providing proper veterinary care. We believe your 6 dogs were left to die because they weren't considered profitable enough to keep." The cruelty of it still took Jake's breath away. "What happens now? Are my dogs safe?" "Mr. Morrison, your dogs are absolutely safe. You rescued them. You've provided excellent care and you've adopted them legally, but we're hoping you might be willing to help us with something. We're building a case against this individual, and your testimony about the condition you found the puppies in could be crucial evidence." Jake didn't hesitate. "Of course I'll help. Whatever you need." "There's something else," Detective Williams added. "This puppy mill operation may have affected hundreds of dogs over several years. We're working with several animal rescue organizations to provide care for the animals we've recovered, but the resources are stretched thin. Given your experience and success with your 6 dogs, we wondered if you might be interested in helping with the rehabilitation effort." Jake looked around his office at his 6 dogs, each one healthy, happy, and full of personality. The idea of helping other dogs who had suffered similar trauma was both appealing and daunting. "What exactly would that involve?" Jake asked. "We have about 20 more German Shepherds, various ages, that need temporary foster care while they recover from neglect and abuse. Most of them have medical and behavioral issues similar to what your dogs experienced. The rescue organizations are asking for experienced volunteers who understand the breed and have the space and resources to help." Jake's mind was racing. 20 more dogs would be impossible for him to handle alone, but maybe there was another way to help. "Detective, I can't take 20 more dogs myself, but I have an idea. What if we could create a rehabilitation program here? I have the space and I've learned a lot about trauma recovery in dogs. Maybe we could work with Dr. Martinez and Carol Anderson to develop a program that could help more dogs." Detective Williams sounded intrigued. "That's actually exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Would you be willing to meet with our team and the rescue organizations to discuss possibilities?" After Jake hung up the phone, he sat quietly for a moment, processing what he had just agreed to consider. Guardian seemed to sense Jake's contemplative mood and came over to rest his head on Jake's knee, looking up at him with those intelligent eyes. "What do you think, boy?" Jake asked softly. "Should we help more dogs like you?" Guardian's tail wagged once, slowly, as if he understood the question and approved of the answer. Jake was already formulating in his mind. Jake realized that his journey with these 6 dogs had been preparing him for something bigger than he had ever imagined. The skills he had learned, the relationships he had built with veterinary professionals and trainers, and the deep understanding he had gained about canine trauma recovery had all been leading to this moment. He looked around at his 6 dogs, each one a testament to the power of love, patience, and commitment in healing trauma. They had not only recovered from their terrible beginning, but had thrived beyond anything anyone could have predicted. If Jake could help create a program that gave other dogs the same chance, he knew he had to try. 6 months later, Jake stood in the middle of what had once been an empty field on his property, watching as construction workers put the finishing touches on the Guardian Angel Dog Rehabilitation Center. The facility, named after his protective male dog, represented the culmination of an incredible journey that had begun with 6 dying puppies in the snow. The center was designed specifically for traumatized dogs, with separate areas for medical treatment, behavioral rehabilitation, and socialization. Dr. Martinez had agreed to oversee the medical aspects of the program, while Carol Anderson would lead the behavioral rehabilitation team. Jake had used his photography skills to document the entire construction process, creating a visual story that would help future donors understand the mission. The first group of rescued dogs had arrived 2 weeks earlier. 23 German shepherds of various ages, all survivors of the puppy mill operation that had nearly claimed Jake's 6 dogs. Some were puppies, others were adult breeding dogs who had spent years in terrible conditions. Each one needed individual attention and care. Jake's original 6 dogs had become the therapy team for the new arrivals. Guardian, now full-grown and magnificent, had an incredible ability to calm anxious newcomers. He would approach scared dogs slowly and patiently, lying down nearby until they felt safe enough to interact. His presence seemed to communicate that this was a safe place where dogs were valued and protected. Hope, still small but mighty in spirit, had become the ambassador for the most fearful dogs. Her gentle nature and obvious happiness helped other dogs understand that humans could be trusted. Jake often found Hope sleeping next to newly arrived dogs who were too scared to interact with people, gradually building their confidence through her example. Scout, Ranger, Storm, and Tracker each contributed their own unique skills to the rehabilitation process. Scout helped teach problem-solving and confidence to dogs who had been confined for long periods. Ranger showed by example how to peacefully coexist in a group. Storm brought joy and playfulness to dogs who had forgotten how to have fun. Tracker demonstrated that curiosity and exploration were safe and rewarding. The results had been remarkable. Dogs who had arrived cowering and traumatized were learning to trust again. Dr. Martinez had developed medical protocols specifically for puppy mill survivors, addressing not just physical health but the psychological trauma that accompanied years of neglect and confinement. Jake had also partnered with local schools to create an educational program about responsible pet ownership and animal welfare. Students would visit the center to learn about the dog's recovery and the importance of supporting ethical breeding practices and rescue organizations. The story of the 6 German shepherds had caught national attention when a major magazine published Jake's photo essay about their rescue and rehabilitation. The article generated donations from around the country, allowing the center to expand its mission beyond just German shepherds to help all breeds of dogs affected by puppy mills and abandonment. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Detective Williams called to inform Jake that the puppy mill operator had finally been arrested and convicted. The evidence Jake provided about the condition of the 6 puppies, combined with testimony from other witnesses, had led to substantial criminal charges and civil penalties. "Mr. Morrison," Detective Williams said during that phone call, "I want you to know that your decision to rescue those puppies has led to justice for hundreds of animals. This conviction will prevent this individual from ever operating another puppy mill, and the financial penalties will help fund animal welfare programs throughout the state." On the 1-year anniversary of the rescue, Jake organized a celebration at the rehabilitation center. The entire community came out to meet the dogs and learn about the program. Local news crews covered the event, and Jake used the opportunity to share the broader message about animal rescue and rehabilitation. As Jake watched children playing safely with dogs who had once been too traumatized to trust humans, he reflected on how much his life had changed. What had started as a solo photography career had evolved into a mission that combined his love of animals, his professional skills, and his desire to make a positive impact in the world. Guardian, now a certified therapy dog, moved through the crowd with dignity and grace, allowing children to pet him while keeping a watchful eye on his human family and the other dogs. Hope stayed close to Jake, but no longer out of fear or dependency. She had grown into a confident, happy dog who simply preferred her human's company to anyone else's. The other 4 dogs each played their roles perfectly during the celebration. Scout entertained visitors by demonstrating her problem-solving abilities. Ranger maintained peace and order among the many dogs present. Storm delighted everyone with her enthusiasm and energy. Tracker impressed visitors by showing how intelligent and trainable formerly traumatized dogs could become. Dr. Martinez spoke to the crowd about the medical aspects of the program, explaining how proper veterinary care and nutrition could help dogs recover from even severe neglect. Carol Anderson demonstrated training techniques that helped rebuild confidence and trust in traumatized animals, but the real stars of the event were the success stories dogs who had graduated from the rehabilitation program and found loving permanent homes. Families brought their adopted dogs back to visit, showing how completely these once broken animals had recovered. As the sun set on the celebration, Jake found himself alone with his 6 dogs in the main building of the rehabilitation center. The day had been wonderful, but this quiet moment with his original family was what he treasured most. "You know what, guys?" Jake said, sitting on the floor as all 6 dogs gathered around him in their familiar formation. "I went out that morning to photograph elk, and instead I found my life's purpose." Guardian rested his head on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of affection and trust that never failed to move Jake. Hope curled up in his lap, still small enough to fit comfortably. The other 4 arranged themselves in a circle around Jake, creating a furry barrier between him and the rest of the world. Jake thought about that terrible morning in the snow when he had first heard their cries for help. At the time, he had thought he was saving them. But sitting here now, surrounded by the evidence of how much good could come from one act of compassion, Jake realized that they had actually saved him. His life had meaning and purpose that he had never imagined possible. Every day brought new challenges and rewards as more traumatized dogs arrived at the center and began their journey toward healing. Jake had discovered that his skills as a photographer, his love of animals, and his desire to help others could combine into something much larger than he had ever dreamed. The 6 German shepherds who had started this journey as dying puppies in the snow had become ambassadors for all traumatized animals. Their story continued to inspire people around the world to consider rescue adoption, to support animal welfare causes, and to believe in the power of second chances. As Jake prepared to lock up the center for the night, he took one last look around at the facility that had grown from his decision to follow the sound of crying in a snowstorm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dogs to help, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, Jake was content to be exactly where he was, surrounded by his 6 best friends, knowing that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simple decision to help someone in need. The 6 German shepherds had taught him that love, patience, and commitment could heal even the deepest wounds, and that the greatest rewards in life often come from giving everything you have to help others.